Governor Fortuño is currently a partner in the Washington, D.C. Law Office of STEPTO, where he's a member of the Corporate Securities and Finance Group and the Government Affairs and Public Policy Group. He's also involved in the firm's Latin American practice. Under Mr. Fortuño's leadership as governor between 2008 and 2012, Puerto Rico implemented the largest tax cut in the territory's history, right-sized its government, reined in the deficit, and developed new sources of government revenue. As a result, in the final year of his term, Puerto Rico experienced economic growth for the first time in 6 years. Additionally, Mr. Fortuño's signature public-private partnerships law paved the way for two of the largest recent infrastructure investments in the U.S., one in Puerto Rico's highway system and the other in the island's main international airport. In the 2004 general elections, Mr. Fortuño was elected as Puerto Rico's sole representative in the U.S. House of Representatives. In Congress, he served as a member of the House Committees on Transportation and Infrastructure, Natural Resources, International Relations, and Education and Workforce. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Governor Luis Fortuño.
Thank you, Pat. Certainly it's an honor to share some thoughts with you this morning. But before I do that, I have good news and bad news for Barry. The good news is that, at least in our case, the first couple of years, they're a blur. We can't recall what happened during those years. We just know we survived them, and the kids did as well. The bad news is that they eventually go to college. And I have three 21-year-olds in college. And that can be brutal. Anyhow, I wish you the best. I want to thank you all for inviting me over and allow me to share some thoughts with you all. Just 4 years ago, as I became governor, we were dealing with an out-of-control deficit, high unemployment, a tough business environment, and very limited infrastructure investment. It sounds quite familiar. We reduced our deficit dramatically. We flattened our and simplified our tax system, reducing our rates. We streamlined our permitting process. And then we decided that we needed to attract new investment for infrastructure using the P3 mechanism. Much to our surprise, we looked around and we saw that the best models for P3s were in Canada, Australia, the UK, and elsewhere, not in America. And our core beliefs in implementing our P3 legislation were basically three. Number one, that infrastructure is critical for economic growth and competitiveness. It is key, and I don't think I have to delve into that. Secondly, that both public and private investment must complement each other. They go hand in hand. And thirdly, that the private sector participation can provide a stronger development of our infrastructure, operation, and better maintenance capabilities as well most of the time. So what did we do? Number one, we created the first dedicated P3 authority in America. And we entrusted the authority basically with three main responsibilities. First, that it ought to protect the public interest, of course. Secondly, that it needed to monitor the progress towards the different benchmarks in different projects it was handling. And thirdly, that it would serve as a single point of contact with private investors. We didn't want them, investors to be going around the government bureaucracy. We staffed our P3 authority properly, both internally and externally with consultants. Transparency was key in our process. Actually, every major document that had anything to do with any of the transactions it was handling had to be published in the internet all the time. It was handling a number of projects. Actually, what we did is we asked the public and the government agencies to submit and contribute their ideas to, what can be, what different projects could be actually improved or built using a P3 authority. We insisted on an aggressive schedule to complete the transactions. For example, on the two toll roads, and Jordi can attest to that, we did it all in a 12-month period of time. And certainty is key in putting together these transactions because capital will move around otherwise. We needed to insulate the authority from politics. And the way we did it was we created a board of directors that oversaw the operations of the authority. And two of the board members actually were private sector people, members appointed through the House and the Senate at the state level. And we insisted that, especially at the beginning, that it was clear that the transactions that were moving through the authority were in the public, brought significant public benefits. So we did over 100 schools. That was design, build, and maintenance of public schools. We did a couple of toll roads, as I mentioned earlier. That was a $1.4 billion transaction. And we did the main airport, which was a $2.6 billion transaction. That's actually $250 million investment in new construction at the main airport. What is the present situation in the country right now? Where the American Society of Civil Engineers stated a few weeks back that our infrastructure needs an additional $2 trillion in investment in the next 5 years. $2 trillion is 4 times what we invested in the last 5 years. 4 times. There is no way to tax ourselves that high, and there's no way around it when our roads and bridges and tunnels are starting to show their age. At the same time, we're facing an over $1 trillion deficit, and our debt is around $17 trillion. Many states are resorting to imposing or increasing, raising the sales tax or the gas tax or otherwise. And there is a much better solution, which is to charge a user fee or toll. And that way we guarantee that the money not only is there, but it goes where it should. But we need the federal government, as was stated before, to facilitate private investment in our infrastructure. And right now it is not easy. And I can tell you as a former governor how tough it was to get the government authorities, the federal government authorities, to acquiesce to the transactions I mentioned earlier. I even suggest that we need I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Race to the Top education initiative at the federal level. I would suggest we have a similar Race to the Top initiative on infrastructure coming from the federal government to entice states and major cities to invest in infrastructure using tolling. If we don't do this, let's look around the rest of the world and understand what our competition is doing. Remember, I mentioned earlier that the American Society of Civil Engineers considers that we need to invest $2 trillion in the next 5 years to remain competitive, which is 4 times as much as we invested in the previous 5 years. China will be investing over $1 trillion in its infrastructure in the next 5 years. India will be investing $1 trillion. Brazil will be investing $955 billion. I commend the President for suggesting the $50 billion Fix It First program, but $50 billion is pretty much what Colombia will be investing in the next 5 years. So we're clearly falling short of where we need to be. This should not be partisan or political in nature. We should be pragmatic in our approach to regain our world leadership in infrastructure because we deserve world-class infrastructure. It was because of the ingenuity, creativity, and hard work of our people throughout the years that we were the top superpower in the world. excelling with the best infrastructure available. That is no longer the case, and we don't have a choice. It is not that we have, some years I actually will propose to you that I commend you for your interest in getting engaged with legislatures in Washington. You ought to do it so that everyone in Washington understands that when you all and your constituents sit in traffic in Seattle or in Dallas or in Philadelphia, there's a better way, and it's tolling to invest it in those very same infrastructure, roads and highways and tunnels and bridges to guarantee a better quality of life for all Americans. I am hopeful that in the same way that we have found our way, better way to get ahead in the past with more difficult circumstances, we'll do the same and we'll do the right thing for America when we're dealing with our infrastructure. Thank you, and I wish you the best.
So, Governor Fortuño, thank you so much for being with us today and for giving us some excellent examples of how infrastructure can be supported and strengthened in Puerto Rico. And we have microphones open on the floor, so if you have questions for Governor Fortuño, now would be a good time to approach the microphones. I'm going to start with the first question, and that would be something we've heard addressed a number of ways on the panel today, having to do with political will. And in terms of the important public-private partnership law in Puerto Rico, certainly you had to get support from other politicians in Puerto Rico. I'd like to hear you talk a little bit about,
Sure.
Gaining the support of the legislature.
Sure. Well, first, as I mentioned earlier, we commenced with public schools. And what we did was we were modernizing and rebuilding a public school in each town and city in Puerto Rico at the same time. That way, everyone understood what the benefits that they could reap out of a P3 mechanism. I'm not saying it was easy. It was like pulling teeth at times. But at the end of the day, the legislatures understood that it was better to do this than to start raising the gas tax or the sales tax or otherwise. This was the only commonsensical way to solve this. The problem here is, and actually this is happening more in Washington than at the state capitals, a lot of politicians think that we can keep kicking the can down the road and wait another 5-10 years. We can't. With the kind of investment that I just mentioned earlier that other countries are making in their infrastructure, we cannot keep waiting. Just travel around the country and you will understand what I'm mentioning. I-95, all the way from along the coast line on the eastern part of the country. It is shameful the way it looks at many areas, and it is having not only an effect on our economy, it is also causing significant traffic problems. And on top of that, it can be dangerous. And actually, you mentioned the California example of how many lives are lost because of the unsafe conditions of our highways. So this is an imperative, I will say moral imperative in any way, and that has to be addressed right away. And it will be by everyone here getting together and moving forward that will be deliver the message in Washington. Otherwise, they'll just kick the can down the road again. And believe you me, I served on that committee, in the Transportation Committee.
Thank you. Secretary Shoke spoke about the fact that they had problems implementing tolling in this state, in part because people felt that they were being singled out, that only their road was being tolled, and they felt that was unfair. I'm curious as to whether you faced that same issue in Puerto Rico, and how you communicated to the general public the benefits of tolling specific areas.
Sure. Well, Pennsylvania is a lot larger than Puerto Rico, so that's easier. But we took, I'll say, some of the better known highways that actually where people would stand in line, and traffic for hours at times, and they saw where we did this was we did not believe in unsolicited tenders. These were very specific tenders with very specific parameters as to what we wanted, and there was a time frame to do it, and we put out the contract as to what we wanted to see happen. Thus, at the same time, we were selling the idea to the public and saying, this is what we want to see in this highway. And then, companies from around the world competed for that kind of work. So the way we did it was not unsolicited, but with very specific requirements as to what needed to happen. That way we could convey to the public what was going to happen there in terms of new investment and shortening the driving time and so on and so forth. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.